She was a 22-year-old virgin who spent her entire life hiding her plus-sized body in oversized sweaters. He was the most feared boss in the city, permanently trapped in a wheelchair by a sniper's bullet. Their wedding wasn't a fairy tale. It was a brutal mafia blood debt. But the real trap wasn't the marriage. It was the devastating, deadly secrets they both kept. Gemma Brooks was used to being invisible. At 22, she had never been kissed, never been on a real date, and had long ago resigned herself to the reality of her life. She was a heavy girl, a size 20 in a world that demanded a size 2. While other women her age spent their weekends at crowded clubs in downtown Chicago, Gemma spent hers baking pastries in the quiet solitude of her father's crumbling suburban kitchen, hiding her soft, thick curves beneath layers of shapeless cotton. She was acutely aware of the space she took up, constantly apologizing for simply existing. Her father, Richard Brooks, was a man who took up entirely too much space in a different way. He was a chronic gambler, a man whose hollow promises were as frequent as his losing streaks. Gemma knew things were bad when the electricity was shut off for the 3rd time in 6 months, but she didn't know how bad until the black SUVs rolled onto their dead grass lawn on a freezing Tuesday night in November. The front door didn't just open, it splintered off its hinges. 3 men in impeccably tailored suits stepped into the cramped living room. They didn't look like the loan sharks Richard usually dealt with. They smelled of expensive cologne, leather, and gunpowder. The man leading them, Declan Hayes, had eyes like chipped ice. He didn't even look at Gemma, who was trembling in the corner, clutching a mixing bowl to her chest like a shield. "2.5 million, Richard," Declan said, his voice a soft, terrifying rasp. "You have ignored the Falcone family for the last time." Richard dropped to his knees, sobbing openly, begging for a week, a day, an hour. Gemma watched in sheer horror. The Falcone syndicate wasn't just the local mob. They were a ruthless empire that controlled the entire eastern seaboard. And at the head of that empire was Matteo Falcone. 6 months ago, the city's underground had been rocked by a violent power struggle. Matteo had been ambushed outside a restaurant. He survived, but a bullet severed his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. The streets whispered that the loss of his legs had only sharpened his cruelty. "I don't have the money," Richard wept, his face pressed to the scuffed linoleum. "But I have an asset. Something clean, something untouched." Gemma's blood ran cold as her father's shaking finger pointed directly at her. Declan finally turned his gaze to Gemma. His eyes slowly dragged over her heavy frame, her panicked, tear-streaked face, her messy bun. His lip curled in faint disgust, but he pulled a sleek phone from his pocket and made a call. He spoke in hushed Italian, his eyes never leaving Gemma. "The boss wants to see her," Declan announced, snapping the phone shut. Before Gemma could scream, before she could even process the absolute betrayal of her own flesh and blood, rough hands grabbed her arms. She was dragged out of the only home she had ever known, her father's pathetic whimpers fading into the cold night air. The Falcone estate was a fortress of iron gates and sweeping Gothic architecture, hidden deep within a heavily wooded suburb. Gemma was thrown into a sprawling, dimly lit library, smelling of old paper and rich tobacco. She stood shivering, feeling entirely too large and yet devastatingly small in the vast, intimidating room. Then she heard it, the soft, rhythmic whir of an electric motor. Matteo Falcone emerged from the shadows. He was undeniably striking, with sharp, aristocratic features, a heavy jaw, and eyes as dark and unforgiving as a starless night. He sat in a state-of-the-art, custom body beneath the darkest, most shapeless designer clothes the estate staff had purchased for her. With no friends, no phone, and absolutely no connection to the outside world, Gemma retreated to the only place that made sense, the estate's massive industrial-grade kitchen. The head chef, A stern older woman named Maria initially viewed Gemma as a nuisance, but when Gemma quietly took a corner station and began kneading dough with the practiced rhythmic hands of a baker, Maria softened. Baking became Gemma's sanctuary. The precise measurements of flour, the warmth of the yeast, the sweet scent of vanilla. It grounded her. She baked brioche, heavy chocolate tarts, and delicate cannoli, leaving them on the kitchen island. She didn't know that every night, after the estate went entirely dark, a quiet electric motor would hum down the hallway. One bitterly cold Tuesday at 2 p.m., unable to sleep, Gemma crept down to the kitchen for a glass of water. She froze in the archway. The kitchen was unlit save for the pale moonlight spilling through the skylights. There, parked in the center of the room, was Matteo. He was in a simple black t-shirt and sweatpants, holding a half-eaten piece of her raspberry ricotta cake. He didn't look like the terrifying boss of the Falcone syndicate. He looked utterly exhausted. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his jaw was clenched in tight, agonizing spasms. Gemma took a step backward, intending to flee, but her foot snagged on the heavy hem of her robe. She stumbled, gasping as she caught herself against the doorframe. Matteo's head snapped toward her, his hand flying to the Glock 19, resting on his lap. When he realized it was her, his grip loosened, but his hired the hitmen. You doctored the Kroll report to frame Richard Brooks. Knowing I would be so blinded by revenge, I wouldn't look deeper. You wanted the eastern seaboard for yourself. Declan laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. You were getting soft, Matteo. You refused to move drugs through the ports. You were costing us millions in potential revenue. The hit was supposed to kill you. But when you survived, stuck in that pathetic chair, it was almost better. I've been running the family behind your back for 6 months, while you wallowed in self-pity. And Richard Brooks? Gemma cried out, her voice trembling but loud. My father. Declan sneered at her, his eyes raking over her plus-size frame with absolute disgust. Your fat, pathetic loser of a father owed me money, sweetheart. I paid off his marker by telling him to park a car on 4th Street. He didn't even know what he was driving for. When Kroll Inc. sent the investigation file, I just swapped the driver's name to his and handed it to Matteo. 2 birds, 1 stone. I kept my hands clean, and Matteo wasted his time torturing a harmless idiot. Matteo's jaw ticked. You are a dead man, Declan. No, boss, Declan smirked, stepping closer. You are. And I think I'll make you watch me put a bullet in your little bakery wife first. Declan shifted his aim toward Gemma. Time seemed to slow down. Matteo let out a feral, guttural roar. He threw his upper body sideways, grabbing his disassembled slide and throwing it with deadly precision straight into the face of the guard to Declan's left, while reaching for a backup weapon strapped beneath his desk. But Declan recovered instantly, swinging his gun back toward Matteo. Gemma didn't think. The girl who had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, trying to take up as little space as possible, suddenly realized the power of her own body. With a breathless scream, Gemma launched herself off the sofa. She didn't have grace, and she didn't have combat training, but she had weight, and she had momentum. She crashed into Declan just as his finger squeezed the trigger. The gunshot shattered the library window, missing Matteo by an inch. Declan grunted as Gemma's heavy frame slammed into him, knocking the breath from his lungs and sending them both crashing heavily to the hardwood floor. Declan cursed, viciously backhanding Gemma across the face. She tasted blood, her vision swimming, but she refused to let go, using her full body weight to pin his gun arm to the ground. Get off me, you fat bitch! Declan snarled, trying to throw her off. Bang! The deafening sound of a gunshot echoed through the room. Declan's body went completely rigid beneath Gemma, a neat red hole appearing dead center in his forehead. Gemma gasped, rolling off the dead man and scrambling backward in absolute horror. She looked up. Matteo was leaning dangerously far out of his wheelchair, his backup gun smoking in his hand. The remaining 2 guards, seeing their leader dead, dropped their weapons and fled the room in sheer panic. Silence descended on the blood-spattered library, broken only by the crashing thunder outside. Matteo threw the gun onto the desk and wheeled himself rapidly toward Gemma. He didn't stop until his footrests bumped against her legs. With a painful groan, relying entirely on his massive upper body strength, Matteo hauled himself out of the chair, dropping to the floor beside her. "Gemma," he breathed, his hands frantically gripping her face, her shoulders, checking her for bullet wounds. "Gemma, look at me. Are you hit? Look at me." "I'm okay," she sobbed, burying her face into his chest, her large hands gripping the fabric of his shirt. "I'm okay. You shot him. He's dead." Matteo wrapped his thick, powerful arms around her, pulling her heavy, shaking body securely into his lap, ignoring the dead weight of his own legs. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent of vanilla and gunpowder. "You saved my life," he whispered fiercely against her skin. "You threw yourself at a loaded gun for a man who bought you. Why?" Gemma pulled back slightly, looking down into his dark, searching eyes. The coldness was entirely gone, replaced by a burning, desperate fire. "Because you aren't the monster you pretend to be, Matteo, and because you're my husband." Matteo let out a ragged breath. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the soft, full curve of her hips pressing against him, the heavy flush of her cheeks, the beautiful, abundant softness that he had once callously dismissed. He felt a profound, overwhelming wave of devotion for this incredible woman who had shattered his icy exterior. "I was a fool," Matteo murmured, his hands moving down to cup her thick waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "I looked at you and saw porn. But you are a queen, Gemma. My beautiful, brave queen. I don't deserve you, but God help me. I will burn down the rest of this city before I ever let you go." He pulled her down, and for the first time, his lips captured hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was bruised, desperate, and possessively deep, claiming every inch of her. Gemma melted into him, her insecurities washing away in the fierce heat of his touch. He worshipped the fullness of her body, his hands mapping her curves with a reverence that told her she would never be invisible again. The blood debt was gone, washed away by the blood of the traitor on the floor. In the ashes of the betrayal, the paralyzed king had finally found his strength, and the invisible girl had finally found her throne. What an explosive twist! From a forced mafia hostage to the undisputed, fearless queen of the Falcone Empire, Gemma proved that true strength and beauty come in all sizes. Matteo and Gemma's dark romance proves that love can bloom even in the most broken, dangerous places. Did you see that betrayal coming from Declan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you loved this thrilling story, please hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe for more.